Honourable members, a blessed good afternoon. This session is now resumed. Thank you.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise not to speak, but to essentially raise an issue and move a motion in respect of our next speaker, the Honourable Member for St. James North, who has been the chairman of the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities, and who, while not in a position because of the rules of the chamber, has been able to lead the debate in this place. We believe on this side that the honourable members should be permitted a longer period than is permitted by the rules of the House, which is the usual 30 minutes, to be able to not only address this chamber, but certainly to speak to a number of the areas in his capacity as the chairman of the committee in this place on this particular resolution. So I therefore beg to move the motion that section 31 be suspended for the Honourable Member for St. James North to be able to speak longer than the usual allocated 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The request for the Honourable Member for St. James North to have an extended period to speak is approved because we know of the excellent work he's been doing over the years as a great advocate for those who are disabled, and therefore the Honourable Member for St. James North. The question is that this this motion be supported for the Honourable Member for St. James North to have an extended period of time. Honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Honourable Member for St. James North.
I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise, of course, in support of this resolution. This is a day that the community of people with disabilities and their caretakers have been looking forward to with tremendous expectation for a very long time. It could only be surpassed when the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Bill comes to this Parliament. What we are doing today is the culmination of 2.5 years of extensive work. It is to the credit of, as the Honourable Minister for St. Michael South said, firstly, people with disabilities themselves and their caretakers who gave significant input into what we're doing today in various town hall meetings, not only with the general public, but specifically with people with disabilities. And also not only through town hall meetings, but by written memoranda and by oral statements. It is made possible by the wider community of Barbadians. And certainly it has been made possible by the wisdom of the Cabinet of Barbados, led by the Honourable Prime Minister, who, as we heard today, as we have heard previously, has an aunt who is deaf, who lived, I think, most of her life with the Prime Minister's, Honourable Prime Minister's parents. It's made possible by the significant input and caring nature of the Honourable Minister for People's Empowerment, who gave the committee, of which I was chairman, National Advisory Committee, to establish a commission on the rights of persons with disabilities, full rein to bring what we have brought. There was full confidence in the committee to deliver, and not only to deliver, but within the time frames that were given. And through the committee members, Madam Speaker, half of whom people with disabilities, and the other half of whom had close or have close relatives of persons with disabilities. So you would excuse me Madam Deputy Speaker, if I name and individually commend those who comprise the committee. The Deputy Chairman was the Most Honourable Carrie-Ann Eiffel, Freedom of Barbados. Carrie-Ann is one of the most outstanding people that one could ever hope to meet in a lifetime. And nothing to do with her blindness. Just an incredible individual. We found it fit on merit as a government to give her the highest honor that can be conferred on a Barbadian, short, of course, of national hero last year. And she earned that title as of right, because every president of the Senate, past and present, has that highest award, national award, whether it's a knighthood, and now, of course, since we are a republic, the Most Honourable Freedom of Barbados. And before that, Carrie-Ann was the only one who didn't have. So we remedied that situation last year when the present holder of that position as well, President of the Senate, got. Then Ms. Janelle Odell, whose name has been mentioned previously, absolutely tremendous individual. Blind, the only blind attorney at law in Barbados, but that hasn't never stopped her from being top of her class at Hewitt Law School, gaining a distinction, gaining first class honors in her law degree. Senator Andrely Boyce. Andrely speaks for himself, a member of the other place, just graduated 2 weekends ago with a master's degree in law, public policy, I believe. That is now his third or fourth university degree. A person who has made his mark in this society and in wider Caribbean, because he's on committees with the CDB, etc. Granville Carter, Barbados Service Medal, National Honor Awardee. And not only because he won the blind calypso contest on 7 occasions, but again, just a tremendously intelligent individual. Reached the final, first person with disabilities to reach the final of the calypso contest this year. And then there were others who, like myself, have close relatives who have disabilities. Sonia Rollins, an educator at the Derek Smith School. Ms. Haig, who, as we all know, a top communications and public relations specialist. John Hollingsworth, who is director of the National Disabilities Unit, and Mr. Larry Smith, attorney at Law Silk, one of the finest legal minds in this country. So it was a quality committee, and could expect nothing less than what that committee was able to produce, as I said, within the time period given to it of 10 months. Both policy, 172-page document crafted by Professor Drain Devenish, as you heard from the Honourable Member from St. Michael's South, and a draft Rights of Persons with Disabilities Bill. The consultant on that was Dr. Drayson Haynes, at the time Deputy Dean of the Law Faculty, the University of the West Indies now, a lecturer, law lecturer at top university in London. And that aspect of the committee's work was underwritten by the Law Reform Commission, who worked closely with us. That Law Reform Commission headed by esteemed jurist and former Attorney General of Barbados, former Chief Justice of Barbados, Sir David Simmons, senior counsel, of course. So that is what has brought us to this stage. And the basis of it, of course, is the Barbados Labour Party's 2022 manifesto, which spoke, as you would have heard earlier from the Honourable Minister of People's Empowerment, of empowering a commission for improving the lives of persons with disabilities to develop policy and strategies and legislation interventions to ensure better access for persons with disabilities in this country. Our manifesto also went on to say that you have to empower economically persons with disabilities and therefore establish an Include Me BIM initiative to mainstream economic opportunities for persons with disabilities. Following on that, of course, the Cabinet established the committee in June 2022, and this has been the result. So to understand the concept, and I'm Deputy Speaker, I'd like to define, not only for the benefit of Parliament, of course, parliamentarians know, but for wider Barbados, what is accepted as a person with disability, and is defined in our draft legislation as to include a person with long-term and short-term, in fact, impairment, including physical, mental, intellectual, developmental, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. Now, this definition is kind of universally accepted as a definition for a person with disabilities, except some countries omit short-term impairment and just speak to long-term impairment. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which Barbados signed in June 2007 and ratified February the 27th, 2013, speaks to only long-term impairment. But of course, that convention, which came into effect in 2008, 16 years ago, matters and concepts have evolved in that decade and a half, and generally accepted that short-term impairment should also be included. You will see from those dates, Madam Deputy Speaker, 2007 when Barbados signed on to this convention, 2013 when Barbados ratified it, that there can be no political divide, as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition conceded this morning on this issue, because both political parties of this country have signed at the United Nations agreeing to the concept and the principle that we need to do better, we need to do as best as we can to improve and maximize the potential and the talents of persons with disabilities. And that means including people with disabilities in all aspects of society, socio-economic, cultural, spiritual, to include them in participating in all aspects of life to the best of their capacity, not to deny them any rights which they're entitled to under the Constitution of Barbados or the laws of Barbados, and to treat them as equal human beings as they are, born of the flesh and made by God. This is a significant day, ma'am. I mean, the World Health Organization has estimated that 15%, in other words, what? 1 in every 7 persons globally have some form of disability. 1 billion persons. It therefore means that persons with disabilities are the single largest minority group globally, with continuously rising population numbers, because clearly the older we get, and there's no doubt that people are living longer these days than they were before, the more likely it is that you're going to get a disability, that you're going to be blind, that you're going to be mobility challenged, that you're going to be deaf, you're going to acquire some form of diabetes or dementia. So it is a concern, and of course, Barbados is not denied this concept because we have an aging population. We all know that. We've debated that issue many times in this parliament up to recently. So UNESCO reports in 2021 that 1 million people live with some form of disability in the Caribbean alone. And that comprises 10% of our Caribbean community's population. It is estimated that in Barbados, our population of persons with disabilities somewhere around 7 or 8%. In other words, 1 out of every 12 persons, 1 out of every 13 persons, roughly in Barbados, have some form of disability. The numbers in the 2010 census were about 11,500 persons. That has increased, no doubt, from in these 14 years, because, as we all know, we had chikungunya, which left some people who survived with a disability even more prevalent and of greater significance. As we all know, was COVID, which has left many people who survived with some form of disability, whether it's back pain or whatever. And therefore, this persons with disabilities is a category of people in our country that no caring government could ignore. And this government has stepped up and treated to the issue with what we're doing today. What extends the issue even more, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the fact that all statistics show, whether it's the Caribbean Development Bank, United Nations statistics, our own statistics, that a substantial sector of persons with disabilities are economically vulnerable. Not only in Barbados, but in the Caribbean, and not only in the Caribbean, but throughout the world. A large percentage of the people who live below the poverty line have some form of disability. And therefore, it is fitting for any government to seek to improve the lives of those people with disabilities, our constituents, ma'am, who make up such a substantial percentage of people who need state intervention economically and financially to be able to survive in our country. It is even more serious in terms of women. And we men cannot argue or dispute the contention that women are more vulnerable in most aspects, economically and socially, in terms of abuse, sexually and otherwise, than men are. And disabilities, of course, more prevalent than women. Women live on average longer than men in this country. And then, of course, children with disabilities is another aspect that you have to focus on, and that's accepted internationally at the United Nations. And we have followed that in terms of focusing not only especially on women with disabilities, but on children with disabilities as well. So the committee went about this in terms of getting data to compile its report, which is laid in Parliament today and is part of this resolution in a very strategic manner. We first started out after being established in May 2022, we started out in June 2022. We're meeting with every ministry in this country, every ministry, to see what are the challenges, to brief the ministries on what we were doing, and in fact, quite honestly, to let senior ministerial officials from the permanent secretaries down come to an understanding of what is being faced. Because in a lot of cases, quite honestly, people's minds, even though they're top permanent public officers, their minds weren't addressed to the challenges of people with disabilities. or the challenges people with disabilities face on a daily basis. And I commend, as I have done previously in this Parliament, Madam Deputy Speaker, each and every minister of every ministry met with us when we requested a meeting of a ministry. Invariably, in every case, the minister headed that meeting, that dialogue, and it was by Zoom then, of course. We're talking about June 2022. We were not yet out of COVID. These meetings were by Zoom. And every minister participated, led from the front. By that way, indicating their concern and their understanding of what needed to be done in terms of coming up with concepts, with plans, with strategies, and not only coming up, but implementing them to make lives of people with disabilities better. And after that, it's in the report of the committee listed all the various sectors we met with, the dates we met with them. And I just, for the public's sake, want to go through. We met with the United Nations, the agencies based in Barbados, the trade union movement, labor organizations, the business community, Employers Confederation, Chamber of Commerce, private sector associations. Some people we met, some of these organizations we met with on 2 occasions, the Human Resources Management Association, Hotel and Tourism Association, the Social Justice Committee, faith-based organizations, Banking Association, we met with them twice. We met, as I said, there's no politics, partisan politics in this. We met with the Democratic Labour Party on 2 occasions, the first by Zoom. The second time, Senator Andrelli and I went into the Democratic Labour Party and met a morning with the then president and other members. Now, the issue here, of course, is that those who we met with on the first occasion by Zoom, quite a few of them have either voluntarily or otherwise by force, by being locked out a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, I think it was in August at an annual conference, and have departed from the Democratic Labour Party. That is life. As we have indicated to the present leader of the Democratic Labour Party, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, we are willing to come and meet with him wherever he wants to meet, because we recognize that the grand norm has changed in terms of the leadership of the Democratic Labour Party, and the Honourable Leader of the Opposition confessed that he's a student in this area, and we're willing to meet with him to brief him and clarify any issues, because as he has said, and you have to give him credit, Madam Deputy Speaker, for coming today and, agreeing that there's consensus on this issue, as there has to be. And we have to present to the public a common front on this, and we're willing to come and speak with him, go through each, however long it takes, at any time, any place, on the policy. We will send him the draft legislation as we had sent the previous president. The previous president of the Democratic Labour Party is in possession of what was at that time the latest version of the draft legislation. We will send the Honourable Member for Christchurch South the same, so that when, as the Honourable Member for St. Michael South said, the bill, Rights to Disabilities Bill, comes before this Parliament before the end of the year, there will be consensus on that as well. We met with all the tertiary and private educational institutions, medical, dental, occupational therapy, pharmaceutical, fraternities, private Sector Transportation Association, Grantley Adams International Airport, the insurance companies, telecommunication companies, building and civil engineering companies. We met with the Alliance Party for Progress. In other words, the Honourable Mr. Joseph Atherley, who was immediate past leader of the opposition. All of that we did. As the Honourable Member for St. Michael South said, I had over 75 meetings, town hall meetings all around Barbados. Each member of the committee went on call-in programs, all types of media on this issue. And like I said, we received an analyzed written memorandum on invitation from various NGOs and individuals. We also wish to commend the secretaries to the committee. We had two secretaries, Ms. Laura Burnett and Ms. Zima Montara, who did invaluable work with us in trying to get the report, in getting the report compiled, and in, providing secretarial services at each of these meetings. The national policy document, as you see, follows certain thematic areas, which the Honourable Member for St. Michael South went through some, and it aims essentially to strengthen and enhance national awareness of the rights and needs and concerns of persons with disabilities, to create a natural environment whereby all forms of marginalization, discrimination, and non-inclusion, and all barriers and constraints for the advancement of persons with disabilities are eliminated, and to create the enabling conditions for all persons with disabilities to fully access essential opportunities, resources, services, benefits to lead to achievement of their full potential, as well as personal and career development as equal human beings, to their inherent dignity, independent living, autonomy, as well as to their meaningful participation, inclusion, and engagement in Barbados development. In other words, like every other citizen of Barbados is entitled to. And the national policy, if I may say so, represents the most progressive, multifaceted, and targeted effort to advance and promote and protect the full rights and fundamental freedoms of persons with disabilities in Barbados that has ever been done. It, as we heard, Madam Deputy Speaker, everything can be done in a day. Rome wasn't built in a day. And therefore, the policy document is a 2023 to 2030 document with short-term aims of between 1 and 3 years, many of which have been started already, and we will come to that. Medium term between 3 and 5 years, and then long term between 5 and 7 years. These are the goals which have been set. The vision statement of the national policy is the realization of a fully inclusive Barbados society that promotes the self-determination, dignity, and equality of all persons with disabilities, free from discrimination, in a way that empowers them to lead safe, productive, and fulfilling lives and career and destinies. And today, Madam Deputy Speaker, while we were waiting for Parliament to start, the media took the opportunity to interview some of the persons with disabilities who have attended today's sitting, and let me commend those that have attended. Essentially, the leaders of the community for people with disabilities attended and are still here, attending this sitting here today. And this shows the importance, and as they told the media, the significance of today, of what this government is doing. They said that today is a day that they've waited for a long time. They mentioned that transportation, accessibility to the built and natural environment of Barbados is one of the most significant of import to them. The issue of employment. We've heard that only 10% of people with disabilities in this country, adults with disabilities, are employed. And that is obviously a serious issue of which no country can be proud of. The reality is that globally, 80% of people with disabilities, it is estimated, are unemployed or not employed in terms of self-employment. So we have a lot of work to do in this area. They also mentioned education and obviously health, because the health of a nation is the wealth of the nation. And I noted with commendation, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in his inimicable way, and let me put it that way, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition mentioned the concept of affirmative action. And he spoke about it in terms of the American situation and what the Supreme Court inexplicably in America has now done in terms of removing affirmative action, which helped a vulnerable sector of their population, black people, for the last 60 years, better themselves in terms of their social and economic standing, and have now cut that down. And he spoke of affirmative action, and therefore I took that to mean that the opposition party will join with this government in its concept of affirmative action for people with disabilities. This is a concept that we are preaching and which will be in the draft, which is in the draft legislation, let me put it that way, on rights of persons with disabilities, because we believe that people with disabilities are so far behind and need the help of affirmative action. In other words, if there are two people of equal merit and qualification who have applied for a job, one with disabilities, one without disabilities, that the person with disabilities should get the job. If not, as the Honourable Minister for People Empowerment said, you can address in any significant way the fact that only 10% of adult people with disabilities in this country have a job or are in sustainable self-employment. You need that kind of concept, that kind of transformation, reformation, to really assist people with disabilities in terms of employment. And I took tremendous note of what the Leader of the Opposition said, essentially agreeing to that concept, which this government is of similar mind and ilk. But before we can reach people with disabilities being employed, we have to go to education. And part of course, the educational transformation that the Ministry of Education is proceeding to right now is how to uplift people with disabilities in terms of education. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the fact of the matter is, even though we have had on our legislation an education, from the time they had an Education Act of 1962, I think it was 1961, maybe December came into force in 1962. Quote unquote free education at source, paid for by the taxpayers of this country. And even going back before that, in the 1950s, we had 4 secondary schools where education was free. And of course, the grammar schools, the old grammar schools, once you did well, they were free too. But the reality of the situation, and we heard on a nightly basis, as the Honourable Minister for People's Empowerment said, parents come and talk about the challenges of getting a proper education for their children with disabilities. In one case, one mother said she had to switch schools 9 times. Another one said 10 times. and before the child reached 16 in trying to find a proper school for her child. And they got to pay. So I have a situation where people who are, in many cases, vulnerable financially already, and then they have a child with a disability, and then they got to pay for that child to go to school at a private institution, which can cater to their special needs. In a lot of cases, the Ministry of Education pays a subsidy for that child's education, a bursary. In a lot of cases, the Maria Holder Trust, the Sandy Lane Trust, pays a subsidy for the education, like the school in just half-mile from here in Perry Gap, off of Robert Street, paid for by Sandy Lane Trust, in a lot of cases the students, but it is not a full subsidy. Parents still have to look for some funds. And in addition, because of the peculiarities of the disability, the parent has to pay for transportation for that child to go to school. So therefore, traditionally, there's been a high level of absenteeism from school because the parents can't afford to pay the transportation every day to go to, let's say, the Chandler School, which, as you well know, ma'am, in your constituency, is not a half-mile down the road from where a lot of people, a lot of children with disabilities live. So these are now the daily reality of persons with disabilities and their parents and their caretakers. And this is what this policy seeks to address. We have not reached the mountaintop. We have not come here today to say that everything is now fine and dandy with people with disabilities. Rome was not built a day. But by what we are doing today and by what we propose to do before the end of this year with the Rights of Persons with Disabilities bill, we have gone a significant way further up the mountaintop than we were 3 years ago. So the issue of access to the built environment, access to transportation, and the Ministry of Public Works, Transportation, as we know, in our first term of office, brought in 59 electric buses, all of which have facility for persons who are mobility challenged. First time in the history of Barbados that has been done. We have made it a point to try and get better access for people with disabilities in terms of the built environment. So I believe that all buildings for which the public has access to under town planning legislation and regulations, conditions must have access for persons with disabilities. All new buildings. Of course, though, that leaves the buildings that are there now, and in a lot of cases, let's face fact, there's a difficulty. And under the draft legislation, owners of these buildings, operators of them, will be given time to retrofit these buildings, because it can't be that a person with disabilities can't get in a building that the public is invited into. I mean, they're not aliens. They're normal human beings. And you can see from this the input of the thrust of the government of Barbados, initiated by the committee, that you go to cultural events now, botanical gardens, for instance, and you see more people with disabilities there than ever before. People, mobility challenged, blind people, because as has been said in here by both the Honourable Minister and by the Leader of the Opposition, days were not long gone where persons with disabilities, children with disabilities were hid in the back room of their house. When you visit the house, you can't see them. Like if the parents were ashamed, like if the parents felt that it was their curse that they did something wrong, that they bore a child with disabilities. And the days of that have to be gone. Have to be gone. It's nothing to be ashamed of. So it was a pleasure, for example, seeing the concerted effort by the Ministry of Culture within the last year to include persons with disabilities in national cultural events. When the monument to Barbados, just a stone's throw from here, was unveiled in National Heroes Square last year. I think it was late last year, and they had a cultural show. They had 4 acts, including persons with disabilities, for instance, and this has to be so, must be so. They have to be included. The policy also speaks towards adequate standard of living and social protection for persons with disabilities, and the initiative by the Honourable Prime Minister in her capacity as Minister of Finance in the budget, in her budget presentation of her budget and financial statements in March this year, to bring into effect a reformed social security system for persons with disabilities, as was mentioned by the Honourable Minister earlier today, whereby now the categories of persons with disabilities who, as of right, will get a non-contributory pension has been tremendously widened from the beginning of this month. And that has been something that we in the persons with disabilities and advocates like myself, I have been in this field for 35 years, have been calling for years, because since 1967, when the National Insurance Scheme Act came into force, it was only blind persons and deaf persons without speech who got a benefit as of right from our social security system. So if you were, for example, you became deaf when you were a teenager because you fell down out of a tree, let's say, and you became deaf. So in other words, you could speak because for 15 years almost you were speaking. You couldn't get a benefit. You had to be deaf without speech. So that has been widened now. And not only them, but children with all these disabilities too, now getting. It is a start. Of course, as the Honourable Member for St. Michael South said, there are categories that don't fall into the categories that of persons who now will get security or who are now getting social security. For example, 2 days ago or yesterday, somebody called me describing this particular disability which doesn't fall in exactitude with any of the 4 categories that have now been widened. But it's a start. And we realized that there was a lacuna in it. We only realized that this month after people started to get benefits that, and if we had thought about it, then that certainly the intention must be to also include those children of the blind, those children who are blind and who, when I say children, minors, sorry, who are blind and who are deaf without speech, within the categories of persons who will get the 50% benefit of non-contributory pension as of right. And the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central intends to speak in this debate, and he will speak further on that issue when he speaks. Awareness building is certainly a factor in the issue. As has been said, we have to make people of Barbados more sensitive and aware of the plight of persons with disabilities. So that, for example, as has been said, and as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition also raised, in addition to the Honourable Minister, the issue of parking in car park spaces reserved for persons with disabilities. I know that in last year's debate in the other place on the financial statements and budgetary proposals, an independent senator said that if they gave her money, she would give up her law practice and go about Barbados to fine everybody who parks illegally in a car park reserved for persons with disabilities, that she felt so strongly about it because she herself has mobility challenges. And the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister has before her, and I think it has been referred to finance for comments before it is brought as an amendment to the legislation, and this is to increase that fine, because it's only $500 now. So somebody might say, man, I care about $500, man, I only 5 Sir Grantley's, man, if they fine me, man, I don't care, let me park in the spot. And when you tell them something, won't tell you about your mother and yourself, that things you don't know. So the fine has to go up. It has to become a fine that befits the offense. And it has to be enforced, because that is another problem. We have to find a way to enforce this against these whatless people. As the Honourable Senator said last year, these whatless, no-carers people. Because it's a serious issue. We have, as I said, education and training, lifelong learning, and the Ministry of Education within its education transformation, and as it pertains to special needs and children with disabilities, is speaking about having particular educational individual development plans for each child going to school, so that the training and education given to them can be tailored towards their special needs and their disability. And that is important. There has to be a national register detailing the skills and qualifications of persons with disabilities, so that an employer could go to this register, can call National Disabilities Unit, can call the Council for the Disabled, and get a list of persons who can qualify and merit the job, because people with disabilities are not asking for tokenism. They are not asking to be handed a job which they're not qualified to do. What they're asking for is to be given an opportunity, because there are many people with disabilities who have graduated from the University of the West Indies, from BCC, many who have technical and vocational skills. And as God is a witness, those employers who give people with disabilities an opportunity realize and say that the better workers than people without disabilities. When we met with private sector, there were employers who said, man, you know, I was a bit reluctant at first to give this person with a disability this job, but believe you me, well, after a few months, I thank my God I gave them a job, that they were more productive than his other employers, because they're not on a cell phone, surfing the net all day. They're not on Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp. They're grateful that they have been given an opportunity to do the job, and they want to prove themselves, and they're doing the work. That is the reality. So we're calling on employers again, as we have done on many occasions, to give people with disabilities an opportunity for work. And if you have to retrofit your place, as is in the draft bill, you know, we will see how it can be done. In a lot of cases, it can be done without much expense. And again, the Leader of the Opposition, Honourable Leader, spoke to that in consensus with us here today, that you can't put money towards everything. Everything can't be looked at in dollars and cents. It's the progress of a nation, to the psyche of a nation, the overall view of a nation, because as Mahatma Gandhi said, a nation has to be judged by how it treats its most vulnerable people. Therefore, we have to be judged by how we treat towards people with disabilities. And it can't, all employers can't be heard to say, well, it's too much money now to retrofit the place. We will make adjustments. COVID has taught us that you could work from home some days, so that if it's difficult for the person with disabilities to come to work 5 days a week, they could work from home three days a week, 2 days a week, and perhaps be more productive than if they came to work. So we have to find a way to make this policy work in terms of its implementation. Persons with disabilities are entitled to quality education just like everyone else. So it means that teaching aids and equipment and devices have to be made available to them for them to maximize their potential and obtain lifelong learning and training and development like everybody else. As I said, the employment is a factor, and within the draft legislation, of course, there's a quota system for government to employ persons with disabilities, and this would not be unique. It is so in many European countries. It is so in Jamaica. In fact, Jamaica had a policy since 1999, because that's when Jamaica got a disabilities policy. They got the law in 2018. It was proclaimed last year, Valentine's Day. And Jamaica had a 4% quota system for employment of persons with disabilities in government and state-run institutions. Is now 5%. And a concerted effort being made to train persons with disabilities so that they can take these jobs. The private sector has to throw in its weight, because government can't do everything. Everything can't be on government. The private sector has to throw in its weight to assist in this regard as well. Healthcare speaks for itself. No need to go into that. I mean, healthcare for a person with disabilities is, on average, is clearly more than it is for someone without. And issues even of children who have autism and having to pay $600 or $700 to be given an anesthetist to quiet them down before they can get dental treatment. These are the challenges that people with children with disabilities, that people with disabilities face. And we heard, for example, during the meetings that a deaf person may be at a polyclinic waiting to be treated, and no one realizes, those in authority, that he or she is deaf, and they call the name, the person sitting down there. Obviously, they can't hear the name, and they're going on and they're waiting there, and the name call. So more people in the customer service arena, in the public sector and private, have to be trained to understand how to relate to people with disabilities. We need more people trained in sign language. And, you know, I confess, it's only now I formally learning sign language. I formally taking sign language classes with Miss Bonnie Leons, who is here helping interpret today. Every Saturday morning I go in there. Because, to be truthful, look, I've grown up with people with disabilities, and I found a way to communicate with the deaf from the time I was young. Everybody knows my sister is born deaf, who is here today. But I feel the need now to formally know it, to widen my knowledge of sign language. In fact, some countries, Guatemala, for instance, I think sign language is a second language, recognized, not a second language, recognized as an official language in Guatemala. In some countries, sign language is offered as a CXC. We have to come to this realization. The Honourable Member for St. Michael South spoke towards that he would like to see sign language one day in the near future offered as a CXC in Barbados. Access to justice, legal recognition, and this is a tremendous area as well. And we commend Professor Velma Houghton, who carried out a study on access to justice throughout the whole of CARICOM and produced a report on it. And this is another issue, because justice delayed is justice denied, and there are situations where persons, because they were blind and they couldn't sign a statement, were denied justice in terms of being able to make a complaint to the police. That is a fact. and cases thrown out, rape cases and assault cases against, but by where persons with disabilities, women were raped and assaulted, that because they couldn't express themselves properly, or there was no corroborative evidence, cases thrown out. That's the kind of reality that we are talking about, and therefore this policy document looks at how we can improve access to justice for persons with disabilities and legal recognition. The issue of protection in disasters and emergencies is key, because again, clearly persons with disabilities, especially those who live on their own, are most vulnerable in disasters and emergencies, and we as a government have tried both when I was Home Affairs Minister and the Honourable Member for Christchurch East, now Home Affairs Minister, focusing on how you could protect people with disabilities during the hurricane season if a hurricane comes in the next 3 days. And we have more facilities now, shelters, catering for persons with disabilities under those circumstances. It's a situation where, of course, we are awaiting the report of the Constitutional Reform Commission. And I know that that commission received memorandum that disabilities, the concept of disabilities should be recognized as a fundamental right, which require the protection in our Constitution in the human rights section, just like how gender and religious freedom and are protected, and race and are protected from discrimination. So these are all issues which, on average, I suppose the average person without disabilities who has never had to confront a person with disabilities within their home environment or their good friend doesn't address their mind to. But the reality is, God forbid, anybody could get a disability at any time. That is why you should remain humble, or one of the reasons why you should remain humble and don't get too powerful, because in a whiff your life can change, in a car accident or whatever. The legislative, the report of the committee spoke about the laws that need reforming, and of course the Education Act needs to be reformed and is in the process of being reformed. He spoke about the Road Traffic Act needing reform, the Representation of the People's Act, because you have a situation now where, let's say a blind person goes to vote, which is their constitutional right. Every Barbadian has the right to vote and are encouraged to vote. Go to vote in an election. And just I mean, let me speak for my constituency. From the time I started to run, of course, focusing on people with disabilities voting, I tried to make sure that all the polling stations in my constituency were accessible to persons with disabilities. The frank truth is that the first time I ran, it was not so. Because when, and each of the 3 elections I ran, I hired vehicle that for persons with disabilities, mobility challenge and blind. I personally took them to the polling station, went with them the first 2 times I ran. The last time I didn't, because I was otherwise assisting. And first time had to help lift up those who were mobility challenged, had to help lift them up in the wheelchairs up some steps. Second and third time, made sure that wasn't so. The voting on ground level, don't have to go up any steps, have a special room for them, and if other people vote in there too, don't mind them. If A and B vote in there and their name Y, the voting in that room too. And got the Electoral Commission to agree, because all of this now is a fetter on your right to vote, and we can't have that. We can't breach the Constitution that way. Blind persons, in some cases, we know in the past, the election officer there at the polling station used to say, well, I can cast the X for you. Well, how that could be right? Because the blind person don't know how that person voting can't see. So it's things like that we have to reform. The Mental Health Act, and the Honourable Leader of the Opposition spoke about mental health, mental incapacity. Mental Health Act Chapter 45 has to be reformed, and I know that the Law Reform Commission is looking at that. The issue of how you go about getting receivership through the courts, an expensive exercise where an individual now has dementia. And of course, as I said, recently in Parliament, we're looking at enjoying power of attorneys, where you have a power of attorney, you then get dementia, the power of attorney still continues to be operative. Unlike now, where as you get dementia, of course, the power of attorney you have is no longer applicable. Community Legal Services Act, we have proposed that you widen the mandate of the Community Legal Services Department so that persons with disabilities will be able to access community legal services in situations where right now they can't. And so we also spoke about the difficulties with the insurance companies, because a lot of people with disabilities speak that they have difficulty acquiring insurance. A deaf person came before us at a town hall meeting and said she has a driver's license for 14 years and can't get insurance up to now. Driving properly, never met in an accident, still can't get insurance. So we have scheduled another meeting with the insurance companies soon, because we all have to be on board on this. It can't be for the insurance companies to be making a whole set of money and you're depriving some people of insurance. But the insurance companies say all is well and good. But the fact of the matter is, too many people with disabilities say, even if they get an insurance, that they're going to pay such a high premium for it over and above what someone without disabilities pays. That makes it just too difficult to obtain. So that gap has to be closed. The banking and financial institutions, we met with them more than once too, because again, too many complaints that you can't access the ATMs if you're mobility challenged, and therefore you got to go in the bank to do your financial transactions, and when you do that, you pay an over-the-counter fee. Or because you're blind, somebody in the bank tells you got to bring a relative, and you as an individual entitled to independent living, you may not want your mother or your son or your aunt to know your financial business, because you got a right to privacy of your financial business, but to tell you bring a relative because you blind. And you more intelligent than the person who telling you that. So these are everyday issues that are confronted by people with disabilities in this country that we have to work towards. As I said, it's not going to be changed overnight. It might take 7 years. A couple of things may not be achieved in my lifetime, but believe you me, I feel proud to be part of a government that is today doing what it is doing. In March 2015, during the month for the disabled, I brought a resolution as an opposition member of Parliament to this Parliament, calling for Parliament to have this debate and to agree in principle to, within 6 months, try and at least start the process of bringing legislation, disabilities legislation, to this Parliament, and the resolution was ignored for the balance of that term. In other words, for another 3 years till Parliament dissolved itself, because the then Prime Minister didn't call an election. and Parliament dissolved itself and he had to call an election. So this is where we're at. As I said, there's no political divide on it, but it can't be denied whatsoever that this government, within the last 3 years, has done more by far than any previous administration, BLP or DLP, for people with disabilities. I just want to quickly go through some areas of practical initiatives by this government in the almost 6.5 years it has been in office. We created a recreational and rehabilitative facility for persons with disabilities at the National Disabilities Unit. Cabinet approved that the Ministry of Housing is effecting a policy whereby 10% of state housing or state assisted housing in the future is allocated to persons with disabilities, and the Honourable Member for St. George South, when he speaks, I'm sure will address that even further. Persons with disabilities are recipients of state trust loans for entrepreneurial ventures, and when the Honourable Member for St. George South again was Minister for Business and Entrepreneurship, he would tell you that the first person to receive such a trust loan was a person with disabilities. Parliament approved policy whereby persons with disabilities, and I think that was in 2020, whereby persons with disabilities together with residents in the particular community engage in at least 5% of state infrastructural developments in any district. So you're doing a project in a district, you're mandated to employ 5% of the persons at least have to be a person with disability or a person from that district. The parking spaces in Bridgetown, 4 or 5 parking bays in Bridgetown that came into effect in May 2022, something that the people with disabilities, the community, went as far as getting a petition signed with about 13,000 signatures. I was one in 2015, and taking it up to the government buildings there in Bay Street and presenting it to the then Prime Minister. And nothing was done in those 7 years until 2022, when the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister became Minister of Public Works Transport. We went down there in Bridgetown, had a ceremony to give 4 or 5 parking spaces to people with disability, for the people with disabilities and vehicles that traveling in to park. So Chris Jukes, can't recognize strangers, but who is here, I believe he was the person to park in the spot. The Barbados is signatory to the Marrakesh Treaty in February 2023. Under that treaty, and that's very important to blind persons, permits the adaptation of published works to be accessible to the blind. In other words, it gets around copyright legislation, where you can, adapt material, written material, as an exception to the blind, and you won't be breaching copyright law. 131 ramps constructed at homes persons experiencing mobility challenges through the National Disabilities Unit, 400 wheelchairs and other assistive devices given through the National Disabilities Unit, 100 prostheses to people in need of them through the National Disabilities Unit. Every year for about, I think the last 3 years since COVID ended, Camp Reach, hosted by the National Disabilities Unit in collaboration with the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Community Empowerment. 70 children with special needs going to these summer camps. Greater transportation for 75 persons with disabilities to medical appointments. Like I said, this is a bugbear because you don't have money anyway, and otherwise you have to pay $200 in many cases for transportation to your medical appointment and back if you don't have anybody to take you. The The subventions to the organizations has increased by $1.15 million through the Ministry of People's Empowerment. 8 organizations serving people with disabilities. And in fact, the general total subventions given to organizations serving people with disabilities within the last 2 or 3 years has increased by 40% across the board. Information technology training to persons with disabilities, visually impaired persons through the National Disabilities Unit, hosting of entrepreneurial markets to give persons with disabilities the opportunity to make some money and to increase the skills in entrepreneurship, and symposiums on entrepreneurship by the Ministry of People Empowerment in conjunction with the Ministry of Business. The Ministry of Education, as I said, we have a far way to go still in education, but we've made a start because the Ministry of Education has prioritized persons with disabilities in taking courses in artificial intelligence and in digital programming and in related training. And some persons with disabilities have already received employment through that means. And the ministry has adopted a policy whereby especially teachers trained in special needs will now treat and teach children who need special needs, because you have a lot of teachers in the system who are qualified in special needs education, but not teaching children with special needs or disabilities. And I think there's now a policy to try and remedy that. The recent decision by the Minister of Education, the Honourable Minister, to reopen Alma Parish School is not without tremendous significance, ma'am. And you, especially, Madam Deputy Speaker, has to take some commendation for that, because you were advocating from the time it was closed in 2017, when we were in opposition. You were an opposition MP, you were saying, but this is madness to close that, the Alma Parish School needs to reopen. And now we have the commitment that it'll be reopening, I think, early next year. And we could go on and on in terms of the offer of national development scholarships for the last 2 years in speech therapy and in audiology, issues where there is a shortage of needs of those specialties in this country. So we only have, I think, 1 speech therapist within the government, and therefore some people with autistic disability and who are deaf have to wait, in many cases, a year or more for an appointment for speech therapy. So these are all issues where this government has made bold initiatives within the last 6.5 years to redress what is definitely an imbalance in terms against persons with disabilities. In my last 5 minutes, I would try to wrap up and to address the issue of the Disabilities Bill, which will form a tribunal where complaints by persons with disabilities, where they are complaining that they're being discriminated against, will be heard. And that tribunal will be very important, and the commission as well. The issue as well has to be, when we met as a committee with each of the ministries, we asked the ministers, look, would you agree in principle to have a person with disabilities on any statutory board or any state committee or school board that is under your ministry? And invariably they said, yes, look, yes, we will make an effort to appoint more people with disabilities on merit to be part of the governance structure in this country. And yes, that has been done to some extent. Sometimes I get calls from various ministers to say, Eddie, who you will recommend to put on this or that. And especially on committees such as infrastructural planning committees, because a person with disabilities should be on that committee to be able to tell the planning department, but look, you know, this elevator should be in Braille. So you have some government departments like and buildings like at Baobab Towers that have Braille in the elevators. But some that have been built within the last 10 years, they don't have Braille. So issues like that, you need input from persons with disabilities. These persons with disabilities need to be included in every aspect of this country. The issue is that, look, let me speak, if you bear with me, ma'am, for 2 minutes on my personal position. My sister is born deaf. I was 5 years old when she was born. I went to school at what was then the New Primary School, now the Wilkie Commonwealth School, in the same compound as the Irving Wilson School. It was called the School for the Deaf then. That school was established in 1967. So in other words, I grew up with a deaf person. Not only grew up with a deaf person, but went to primary school with deaf people. And at lunchtime, we used to play together. We used to run boat together, run races. So the deaf, of course, couldn't hear, but you will have somebody down there and to put up the hands so the deaf see them, and you know to start running the race. So I vowed from the time I was young that my life's role must be, if anything else, public life, to help and move and make life better for people with disabilities in this country. I am proud to have been given the opportunity by Cabinet and by my parliamentary colleagues full rein to do just that. And this is a significant day in my life as well, to be able to see us reach here. As I said, we haven't reached the mountaintop. We have to bring the legislation as well to give persons with disabilities legislative rights that they can take to court. But again, I commend the Cabinet and the Minister of People Empowerment and everyone else who has brought us this far as we endeavor to try to redress the inherent imbalances in our society towards people with disabilities and to give them full potential and opportunity to develop as equal citizens of this country. It has to be continuous education of our people in terms of sensitizing them and everybody playing a role in making life better for people with disabilities. So there has to be a continuous public relations campaign on the issue. But we have come far, and I'm proud of the League of Young Socialists of Barbados Labour Party, who 2 weekends ago at our conference successfully brought a resolution to conference which essentially mandates the party to look to see how caregivers of persons with disabilities who, because they're looking after the person with disabilities, their children or whatever, can't work, how they too could get some financial substance from government in terms of financial security, and that's very important. So, look, we've started the process already in terms, as I said, this month, reforming the social security system. It is not the be-all and end-all. I'm sure next year, as the Honourable Minister for People's Empowerment said in his estimates, he's proposing a bit more. And we look forward to the Ministry of Finance agreeing to that. Look, the basket is small, and there's a lot of pressure on a government to try to please everyone. What are the priorities? all sectors coming at you for more money for relief. But clearly there's been a recognition by this government that persons with disabilities are among the most vulnerable people, and that funds have to be spent to try to increase their position. Because if that isn't done, we as a country will suffer, because there's no use, for example, having our social security system, having to pay for, let's say, someone who was working in the public service, intelligent, but you're meeting an accident, so your back break up or your legs injured, and after a year, medically boarding you, and you have to go on disability benefits, which can't sustain you because there's only 50% or so of where you were working, but you're still intellectually capable of working. I've never understood that. So we have to find a way, both in government and private sector, whereby such a person can still continue to be employed, rather than having to be a recipient of disabilities benefit, again, a drain on our social security system, rather than someone who is advancing the development of our country by continuing to work. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank you for giving me, more time by the standing orders being waived. And, I look forward to joining not only with fellow parliamentarians, but the whole of Barbados in getting the realization of this policy document. And when the law comes, the implementation of the law. I'm obliged to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Honourable Member.